Okay, we need to have a talk. So here's the thing. On countless times, on multiple videos, specifically the video where I said the SM57 is the mic you should get above any other microphone, on the video where I said the SM7B plus the cloud lifter makes no sense, and then most recently on my tier list video, I have gotten so many people being like, what about the SE Electronics V7? That's a better microphone. That is a better microphone than the SM57. Without fail, anytime I mention a video that mentions the SM57, the V7 is brought up. And the truth is, guys, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea about anything having to do with this microphone. So it's always pretty much gone like this for me. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work in a few studios, and I've had the opportunity to have a home studio for quite a long time now. And if I'm dealing with a dynamic microphone on the lower end of the spectrum, and if we don't know what to mic an instrument with, we put a 57 on it. If it's a vocal, we might choose the SM58. If it's a guitar cab, we might choose a Sennheiser E609. But besides that, it's pretty much always going to be an SM57 for a number of things. One of the great things about it is there's currently an airplane flying over this apartment right now, but you can't hear it because of this mic. I can definitely hear it. So the reality is I have not paid SE Electronics as a brand much attention at all, because if I'm dealing with that price bracket that they're in, and if I'm dealing with a dynamic microphone, I'm just going to go with the SM57. So let's see if that logic is flawed. Do I look like a ghost? So, starting with the SM57, why am I so obsessed with this microphone? Why do I constantly recommend this microphone over others? Many of you may know my reasoning, but these versus videos tend to end up in the algorithm, so allow me to explain. The SM57 is the pinnacle of, I don't know what to put on it, put an SM57 on it. It will sound probably good. I have said before, and weirdly some people have taken offense to this, an SM57 was probably used on your favorite song. That drum sound to your favorite song probably had an SM57 on it. Favorite guitar solo probably had an SM57 on it. At the very least, in that recording session, an SM57 was tested. It is almost always in the trial, and because of that, there is a ton of documentation on the internet on how to make the SM57 work in a ton of different scenarios, whether that means recording brass, recording drums, recording guitars, recording vocals. The SM57 shows up everywhere. So even if it isn't the most ideal microphone for a specific source or your specific voice, there's gonna be a video, there's gonna be a forum, there's gonna be something out there to show you how it'll work anyways. All right, I'll get off my spiel here, and I will tell you how to make this thing work for voiceover, because there's a specific thing you need. Any old trash pop filter. This one came from a newer NW800. Seasoned listeners will be embraced in nostalgia, because this is the microphone I used for voiceover for 9 months as I made this YouTube channel. This is the whole setup. SM57 and a NW800 clip. That's how I rolled for a long time. All right, so what about this bad boy right here? So this is the V7X, which is supposedly tailored more towards the instrument side of things than the regular V7. That it mostly pertains to the frequency response. It's going to have apparently more extension into the low end and also more extension into the high end. We'll get to the sound a little bit later into the video, but yeah, it does. That is indeed correct in what I have found with this microphone. But first I want to go into the anatomy in this microphone and what makes it different than your regular dynamic microphone that you're going to get around the same price point. Let's start with the grill. This grill is really smart because it's taking advantage of the same form factor of the SM58, meaning you're going to have that pop filter for vocals, but it also has this flat head so you can put it up to things like guitar cabs. But there is an issue with this pop filter that you get on the V7. It doesn't work particularly well for controlling plosive response. Plosives, pretty potent plosives. Pretty apparent whenever you get to plosive response. You can see on the SM57 that really wasn't an issue with this included pop filter, but whenever it comes to the SE V7, the plosives aren't clipping, but they aren't gone. Now you'll notice it's duller, and it's not necessarily clipping, but it's pretty apparent that there's still going to be plosives in your speech, and that really shouldn't be the case for a dynamic microphone with a grill on it. There's not much of an excuse for that. My advice, it's a pretty simple solution. Just use the same foam filter that I'll be using on the SM57. Oh, also, it comes with like an inner foam filter that you can change the color of, and I'm gonna be honest, first time I saw it, I did not know that's what this was for. I thought this was gonna be like a little additional filter because of the plosives problem, so I spent like a good 5 minutes just trying to shove this thing over top like that. I wonder if this will help with the plosives. Peep, peep, peep. Poop. I think it does better. SE Electronics, I think I found a better use for your changing filter. Now, another really cool thing about the V7 is if I just unscrew it here, you're going to see something inside. The capsule of this microphone is actually suspended inside of it, and this is supposed to control hand noise and further noise rejection from any on-stage equipment. That's really awesome, and I think it's a really great thing to include, and I think most dynamic microphones should implement something like this. It seems to be relatively effective at that, but I just love this. A lot of care was put into the capsule and holding it in place. Now, on the note of noise rejection, there is something I want to mention. While I was testing these microphones, when I was recording the voiceovers that you're going to hear at the end of the video, one thing I noticed was the V7 is noticeably worse at rejecting RF noise that you might get from high wattage equipment, speakers, audio interfaces, laptops, computer screens, monitors. So that's just something to keep in mind. It seems to be kind of a magic wand for RF noise, which is probably going to come into play a lot whenever you're using these for live applications. When you're around like a bunch of amps or other high wattage equipment, it might attract that noise, and it's very strange. It seems to almost do this even by rotating the microphone in your hand. Certain orientations seem to invite more RF noise. I have a clip from whenever I was testing these a little bit earlier that I'll put in here. Now it's quiet. Pretty loud whenever you get it close to all the other tech. And now we are testing the same thing on the 57. It's a lot better RF rejection. My mic stand fell off the desk. I'm so professional. Right, so let's quickly discuss gain requirements for these two microphones. The SM57 requires 56 dBs of gain in order to get to around negative 12 dB peaking, which is generally considered to be like the optimal level to begin recording audio. Now, with the SE V7, I couldn't find any solid measurements online, but through some testing, it is very clearly easier and less gain hungry than the SM57. I was on average spending about 5 to 10 less dB in order to get this to peak at the same level as the SM57. So that's great news. It means less powerful preamps and therefore maybe less high quality audio interfaces can power this microphone just fine. Now, in terms of its polar pattern, it is super cardioid, meaning it has a more narrow audio image than most microphones that are just regular cardioid, which should in theory result in more noise rejection. I don't know if you can hear, there's an ambulance going by my house right now. Let's hear how that sounds. Can always rely on Brooklyn for a good sound rejection test. It should be noted though that hypercardioid, one thing that's left out of the discussion a lot of time, there is like a part of the polar pattern that is behind the microphone that could, interfere a little bit with background rejection, although to be fair, in a not very extreme way. Right, so let's talk about the sound of these two microphones, what you guys came here for probably in the first place. So I want to start by talking about frequency response charts, because I think as audio engineers and audiophiles, both of those two communities kind of end up idolizing or glorifying the charts and the graphs of these microphones as if they are the Bible. Now, in reality, these are a little bit more like a restaurant menu. Sure, you can read the ingredients and get an idea of what that dish is going to taste like, but the execution of those ingredients is still a big factor, and you can't tell whether you love said dish just by the menu. Now, there are times where I mention frequency response, and depending on the microphone, it's more or less of a focus on the review, because there just are some microphones where the frequency response is not a good characterization of that microphone. But in this case, I don't think the frequency response could have been any less accurate. You look at the frequency response of the V7, you look at the frequency response of the 57, those two stories can very accurately detail how these two microphones sound different. Those frequency response charts are basically all you need to understand these two microphones and their differences. Let's see how both of these microphones handle high end. Now, if you look at this, the SM57 very clearly has a peak from 5K to 10K and a pretty aggressive peak in that range. While when we look at the SE V7, what we're seeing is a more mild high-end shelf that's covering more of the high end. It's extending even into the mid-range, but at a much milder, more consistent boost. The SE V7 saturates the whole upper end in a really pleasing way, while the SM57 is very much like you're going to get the boost in this area and you're going to like that you get the boost in that area. Deal with it. So we're already discovering how these two microphones are approaching high end in a really different way. Now, whenever you combine that with the fact that the V7 has a very extreme proximity effect, if I get really close to this microphone, this is a lot louder of a microphone and it has a lot more low end. What you've now done, you've essentially saturated all frequencies. There is a boost in the upper mid range, there's a boost in the upper range, and then now there's a huge boost in the low end as well. This microphone is coloring your entire signal. Don't get me wrong, the SM57 still has a frequency response, but it is nothing compared to this microphone. This microphone has a crazy frequency response boost in the low end whenever you get close to it. I think it's like 15 dB. So you've got a situation now where you have two microphones that are really starting to diverge in tone quite a bit. One that, depending on your proximity to the microphone, is coloring it so much. It's a very stylized microphone versus a microphone that is very true to the fact that it's basically boosting in one specific range, and that specific range is in the 5K to 10K. It's very stylized, and that may or may not work out for you depending on how you like to work in post. If you like the sound of the V7 in this video and you don't want to do a lot of editing work behind the scenes, this might be the microphone for you. If, however, you want a microphone that is more true to the signal and you like to work from at least a flatter bass line, then the SM57 is kind of the more tried and true option here. Simply two different approaches to a similar problem. I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to do some blind tests, including some blind voiceover that you can choose based off of that, and then we'll do some blind guitar cab tests. Those seem to be, I think, probably the most likely use for these two microphones, so let's go check that out.
Here is one of the things that I learned that morning. If you cross a line and nothing happens, the line loses meaning. It's like that old riddle about a tree falling in a forest and whether it makes a sound if no one's around to hear it. You keep drawing a line farther and farther away and crossing it every time. That's how people end up dropping off the edge of the earth.
Now, you guys would probably be remiss if I didn't pick one here because of how opinionated I am on the SM57. So I would still go with the 57. I do really like this microphone. I just think most purposes, the SM57 is more flexible because it is less stylized. That doesn't mean there aren't times that I enjoy the V7 more. If I was just using a microphone for voiceover on like Discord or something like that, I think I would probably prefer this because of the fact that it has like that crazy proximity effect, and I think in that scenario I would enjoy it a lot. But I don't necessarily want that same proximity effect on my guitar or on a vocal that I really need to know what's happening in the EQ. Just a little bit bloated for me in that scenario. Guys, I hope that was helpful. You can follow me on Instagram at RealAudioHaze. If you'd like to work on a project with me, you can email me at realaudiohaze@gmail.com. Here's the outro song.